Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome. My name is Bob Mitchell. I'm the CEO of the Global Electronics Council. We are thrilled to welcome all of you and our distinguished speakers from across the climate-related landscape to this webinar on decarbonizing technology, where we will examine the tremendous opportunity to accelerate the market for climate-conscious electronics. We can describe global climate change as a material environmental topic, or even a topic of high saliency in the nomenclature of the human rights community. But make no mistake, this is a crisis. July 2020 was the hottest month ever recorded in history. After the release of the latest finding of the IPCC, the UN Secretary General stated, we are on a pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5 degree limit that was agreed in Paris in 2015. This will yield unprecedented impact to our environment, economies, and societies if we do not bring our collective resources and leverage to bear. The technology industry is undoubtedly a key to the solution, providing a catalyst for measurement, efficiencies, and fundamental solutions. However, we must also recognize that the life cycle of these products and services contributes directly to the crisis, and we must accelerate decarbonizing them that deliver the electronics that we've come to depend on every single day. The Global Electronics Council is focused on not only delivering practical paths to this acceleration, but also to convening those with influence and leverage, such as yourselves, on this common mission. Today, we'll examine this through the lens of and stakeholders that influence the market for sustainable technology. Now, for some ground rules and housekeeping as we move into this dialogue. Next slide, please. First, we'll operate today's webinar under Chatham House rule. Most of you are probably familiar with this rule, but I'll read it just to remind us. Participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speaker nor that of any other participant may be revealed. Next, just a little bit of housekeeping. So first, you might have already recognized all participants are muted by default. To ask a question to a speaker or panelist, please enter it into the Q&A panel of GoToWebinar. The meeting moderator will ensure that questions are either answered through GoToWebinar directly through the chat or live during the moderated panels with our panelists or speakers. If we aren't able to answer all the questions during the webinar, we'll do our best, of course, but we'll follow up directly afterwards with the participant to make sure your questions are covered. Next slide, please. So I'll just briefly go through our agenda. What are we going to talk about today? And how are we going to move through this discussion on decarbonizing technology? Well, first, we're thrilled to welcome Christine Harada, the Senior Advisor for the White House's Office of Federal Procurement Policy, to provide keynote remarks. Unfortunately, Christine couldn't be here today due to a conflict, but she's pre-recorded remarks that we'll play in just a moment. Next, we'll move into looking at decarbonizing technology through a multi-stakeholder view. We've got a great slate of panelists there, Michael Bloom, Camilla Sederquist, Tim Moen, and Verena Radulovic to guide us through this discussion, and I'll moderate that panel. Next, we'll take a look at an offering from Global Electronic Council's EPEAT system called EPEAT Climate Plus. This was just activated as a product designation with a supporting set of opportunities for manufacturers and purchasers to become champions and leaders in the climate conscious product domain through this program, EPEAT Climate Plus. Patty Dillon, our Vice President of Criteria and Category Development, will guide us through an overview of this new designation for EPEAT products. Next slide, please. After a short break, we'll begin to take a look deeper in the market for sustainable products and the major influencers, namely purchasers to begin with. Emmanuel Nwodo, our Senior Manager of Global Relations at GEC, will have a discussion with Elizabeth Etheridge, Charlene Fain-Kessler, and Julia Wolf about the power of purchasers and the EPEAT Climate Plus pledge that is helping us make progress on advancing climate conscious product, the climate conscious product market. And finally, we'll celebrate some of our manufacturer champions that have been leaning into or placing EPEAT Climate Plus products on the market before we close out with closing remarks at 1 o'clock. So without further ado, let's move into our keynote speaker. Before we get there, just one quick thing, just for us to get to know you a little bit better. We're going to be doing a couple of these over the course of the webinar. This is a quick poll, just trying to get a sense of who's on the phone today, so we can get you involved as well, both through the Q&A, but also through some additional surveys. So if you can just briefly on your phone or on a side browser, go to menti.com and type in that code 4961-3345. And then you can just answer this simple question: what type of organization do you represent? That'll allow us all to get to know the audience and what we're looking at in terms of the full slate of participants today. Okay, so while that's getting populated, why don't we go to the next slide and then we'll check back on this in just a little while. There we go, starting to get some answers there. All right, so it looks like we've got government, some company, private sector, nonprofits, consultancies, some of our CABs, our conformance assurance bodies, from our community of stakeholders within the EPEAT system, and we've got some others as well. Okay, so we'll check back on this. I know people are filtering in here. Why don't we go to the next slide and we will introduce our keynote speaker. Wonderful, thank you. So again, I mentioned Christine before. She's the senior advisor for the White House's Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Christine Harada was an appointee of the Biden and Harris administration. She serves within this capacity currently. She's responsible for implementing acquisitions policies covering more than $690 billion in annual federal contract spending. Previously, Christine served as the executive director of the Permitting Council, where she managed a portfolio of nearly $100 billion in large-scale infrastructure projects, most of which are renewable energy, coastal restoration, and electricity transmission projects. Her work advanced the administration's infrastructure agenda to rebuild the economy. She brings more than 25 years of leadership experience in the public and private sectors in a variety of industries, including clean energy technology, impact investing, management consulting, and aerospace engineering. She's also served as the federal chief sustainability officer under President Barack Obama, where she oversaw all federal sustainability related initiatives in energy, vehicle fleets, and acquisitions. Harada also served as the acting chief of staff, the associate administrator of government-wide policy, and the chief acquisition officer at the U.S. General Services Administration. We are thrilled that she was able to pre-record some remarks for us today to inspire our dialogue today. So without further ado, if we can roll the keynote. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much to the Global Electronics Council for inviting me to participate today. I'm very sorry I couldn't join you in person in this important conversation. As the current head for federal procurement policy, as well as the former U.S. Chief Sustainability Officer, I'm very pleased to be here to speak with you about the important work that the administration has been doing and how we can work together to address climate change. Since taking office, President Biden has delivered on the most ambitious climate conservation and environmental justice agenda in history, including signing into the law the largest climate investment ever. The President is committed to helping our country meet the challenge of the climate crisis in a way that grows good jobs and industries and makes us more economically competitive. Some of the Biden-Harris administration's accomplishments thus far include, and this is, by the way, a partial list, we've committed to cut total greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2030, and we're very actively on our way towards that goal. We've passed major climate-smart economic stimulus packages after COVID-19, of course, with the Inflation Reduction Act last year, which built upon the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. We've also tackled super pollutants like HFCs and methanes, which of course are emitted in smaller quantities than carbon dioxide, but pound for pound trap a lot more heat. We've released an updated methane action plan and also issued regulations to phase down HFCs. And relatedly, the Senate also ratified the Kigali Amendment on reducing HFCs. We've required all new passenger vehicles sold after 2035 to produce zero emissions. We've scaled up carbon dioxide removal technology significantly through the bipartisan infrastructure law, providing for significant investments in this type of work. That includes things like wildfire risk reduction, ecosystem restoration to promote natural carbon removal, as well as direct air capture. And the Inflation Reduction Act also, of course, builds on this to support climate-smart agriculture and enhances Section 45Q tax credits for sequestering carbon dioxide. The administration's also ramped up clean electricity standards to 55% by 2025 and 75% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. We've, of course, also set emission performance standards for cement, steel, and plastics, and issued an executive order that directs federal agencies to buy low-carbon building materials and achieve net zero federal procurement by 2045. So, the president's committed to a lot, and we've certainly delivered a lot thus far. But of course, much remains to be done. And so, reflecting on my role now as the Senior Advisor for Federal Procurement Policy, I'd like to reflect on some of the activities that we are undertaking in this particular realm. As many of you know, the federal government is the single largest purchaser in the world. And where we are a major player, the U.S. government can absolutely shift markets. We can also invest in new products and services that drive innovation, and we signal changes in demand to the market at large as well. Just to put a couple of numbers behind that, we spend well over $650 billion in goods and services every year, and we have well over 440,000 contracting officers and 100,000 program managers managing the procurement activities for the federal government. And we as a government have both the ability to lead by example and shift the market to more sustainable solutions. Acquisition is very much viewed as a real catalyst for change for the administration's priorities, namely around advancing racial equality, supporting underserved communities, creating well-paying union jobs, and of course, tackling the climate crisis. In combating the climate crisis, the administration has taken numerous actions to reduce the federal government's carbon footprint, including 3 separate federal acquisition regulation cases. The first is a proposed federal supplier climate risks and resilience rule that will require major federal contractors to publicly disclose their scopes 1, 2, and relevant categories for scope 3 emissions. Minimizing the risk of climate change in federal acquisitions is a rule that will help ensure that major agency procurements minimize the risk of climate change. And we have a proposed sustainable procurement rule that would implement a requirement for agencies to procure sustainable products and services to the maximum extent practicable. The administration is also advancing Buy Clean efforts to decarbonize the federal supply chain. The Buy Clean Task Force is developing recommendations on policies and procedures to expand consideration of embodied emissions in federal procurement and federally funded projects. Furthermore, the task force is identifying those construction materials and products with the highest embodied carbon concerns to prioritize for inclusion in federal procurement and federally funded projects. And we're also launching pilot programs to boost federal procurement of cleaner construction materials and learn about their performance in real-world applications. And to that end, EPA recently announced the availability of $100 million in IRA-funded grants to help businesses develop robust environmental product declarations, or EPDs, which disclose environmental impacts across the life of a product. And additionally, in September of this year, GSA awarded the first IRA-funded procurement for substantially lower embodied carbon materials and the first prioritization of embodied carbon for flat glass. And back in May, GSA also announced its pilot of an IRA Buy Clean specification for procuring $2.15 billion of substantially lower embodied carbon construction materials for federal projects. And throughout these efforts, you see a common thread: the need and demand for climate and environmentally friendly products, and the need and demand for accurate labels to identify such attributes. And while the federal government administers certain programs and labels, we also rely on private sector approaches in our purchasing decisions. And we absolutely applaud all efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of products and create labels so that these products are easily identifiable. And as the administration's point for procurement policy, we at OFPP will continue to work with our colleagues inside and outside government to implement the administration's policies in combating the climate crisis. We're hard at work ensuring that we're leading by example and mitigating the risks of climate change that will adversely impact the way that the government buys, builds, and operates. The administration looks forward to engaging with you collaboratively as the administration works towards meeting with the challenge of the climate crisis while growing good jobs and industries and making America more economically competitive. Thank you again for having me, and I hope you all have a wonderful event.
Wonderful. We can't thank Christine enough for providing those remarks ahead of time. It's clear what the current administration and the U.S. Government is doing to catalyze change using the power of procurement and the leverage they have along with other governments throughout the world. So we're looking forward to continuing to invest in those relationships, learn from where the policies are taking us, and again, provide solutions to help accelerate that market for climate conscious products. All right, next, let's move into the next part of our agenda. So I'm excited to moderate a multi-stakeholder panel looking at decarbonizing technology. We have four distinguished speakers today. We'll explore catalyzing carbon reduction in technology value chains through the lens of this panel. Each panelist will provide their unique perspective on both the opportunities and the barriers to making progress on this vital topic. And I'm excited to have this panel. We had a really lively discussion beforehand to be able to talk through both the incentives, how it's impacting companies to act, both in how they're designing, developing, and placing their products on the market and reclaiming them, and then also what it looks like from the procurement perspective, both enabling that through platforms as well as engaging with governments directly to begin to influence and make it easy to get decarbonized technology on the market. First, before we dive into this panel, we're going to do one more quick poll for you. And so again, menti.com, use that code 49613345. And this allows you to tell us in your view how you would rank the following drivers in accelerating technology decarbonization. A variety of ones here we put out. First is around regulation and policy. Three different areas in terms of demand, public purchasing, business-to-business purchasing, consumer purchasing demand, impact investing, those institutional investors putting their weight behind companies that are placing decarbonized or climate conscious products on the market. 6, NGO or activist influence. And then last, reputational impact. So if you could, again, log into menti.com, you can use that code 49613345 to be able to create your rankings. And here we go. So we're starting to see some results so far. First, we're seeing public purchasing demand, those buyers out there in governments and those catalysts within governments really making a difference in terms of accelerating decarbonization. Regulation and policy, I think we're going to hear quite a bit about that in this panel as well. Investors coming in third right now, consumer and B2B purchasing, reputational impact, and then the influence of those the NGO and the activist community. Obviously, we'll check back on this, see how this evolves over time, but that's an interesting first look at what the audience thinks around the drivers for accelerating decarbonization. I think that's a perfect segue into our first panelist. So if we can just advance the slide one, I'm going to introduce Verena. Verena works for the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. She's the Vice President of Business Engagement. Verena is a cross-sector, multilingual, and entrepreneurial environmental leader with a diverse background and over 15 years of experience working with corporations to improve environmental sustainability. In her current role at C2ES, Ms. Radulovic works with businesses, policymakers, and other stakeholders to advance business action on climate mitigation and resilience, and helps to galvanize business support for ambitious, practical climate policies and solutions. She also oversees C2ES's work on climate-related financial disclosure, supply chains resilience, and the annual Climate Leadership Conference, and is a distinguished member of the GEC Board of Directors as well. Verena, welcome. We're glad to have you, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Bob. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So what I think I'm going to do today as a scene setter before the other panelists talk and kind of go more into the specifics of where and how purchasing can really play an impact on reducing climate impacts. I want to talk about kind of the broader view that we have in terms of voluntary corporate action, regulatory pressures, as well as recent developments in U.S. policy. So kind of picking up where Christine talked about a lot of the things that the federal government is doing, I want to pull back and give a sense of sort of where that is in context and why that is related to electronics, and hopefully make a tie into where procurement plays a role. So one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years, but really a culmination of the last decade, but we're seeing it more and more, is ongoing corporate attention on their Scope 3 emissions. Most companies have incorporated, most companies who are leaders on climate have incorporated their supply chain emissions reductions as part of their voluntary targets. We have over 6,000 companies that have pledged a science-based target. About 2,000 of them have an approved one. I just learned that over 20,000 companies were reporting to CDP in the last year. That's massive in terms of where companies are reporting, measuring, and setting targets. But we are seeing a lot of attention on where and how to make reductions in one supply chain. I think the second thing that we're seeing is, and I'll come back to that in a moment once I talk about the U.S. Policy drivers. The other thing that we're seeing is the regulatory pressure, and a lot of this is coming from Europe, where we're looking at you have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which came out this past year, which asks companies to report on various aspects of sustainability, including their climate impacts and what they're doing to reduce emissions. You have the EU Sustainability Reporting Standards. You have ISSB, which has absorbed the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, as well as other former SASB standards. The UK has issued a transition plan task force. They issued their guidance recently, and this is how our companies setting not only that they're net zero targets, but also developing who they're going to be in a low carbon net zero future, their carbon transition plans. We also see the EU Green Claims Act. This is another directive where it would require companies to substantiate voluntary green claims that they're making on their commercial practices. And so a lot of these efforts, and then you also have, the SEC proposed rule is still in play. It hasn't been finalized. The U.S. government is leveraging procurement as a way to really drive clean practices and clean products. But all of this, what this comes down to is how are companies performing as an entity, as an organization? And then the culmination of that is then the products that they develop, but really, from the transportation to the manufacturing to the way that they're engaging with their suppliers, all of that is wrapped up into how companies are going to be needing to report on what is a significant portion of their emissions. We've also seen in the last year the impacts or sort of the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act's resources and funding that went out, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed before that. And so in the US, we're seeing a lot of investment in clean technologies, whether it's hydrogen or direct air capture or EV batteries, recycling and manufacturing, electric vehicles. And all of this, it relates in some ways to electronics. One, because electronics will become a big part of a decarbonized society. Number two, there's a lot of attention on, the kinds of technologies that are needed to decarbonize heavy industry, to potentially onshore some industries that normally are found in overseas supply chains. And so when we think about what makes a sustainable electronic product, it's all connected to how it is made and how it is transported. And those conversations and how to decarbonize those sectors is getting a lot of attention and a lot of funding from the most recent policy measures. I'm going to come back here just in a moment before I hand it back to Bob, in that when we think about all of this together, and we think about when companies are trying to make reductions in their value chains, and they need really new concrete solutions to thorny problems and thorny issues, these investments in these new fuels and technologies are really important, because as companies are becoming more and more sophisticated on where and how they want to make reductions in their supply chains, we're also seeing the development of new tools, resources, and market mechanisms that can help give companies, I wouldn't say credit is the wrong word, but give companies recognition for how they're making investments deep in their supply chain. So for example, if companies want to invest in green shipping or green trucking, or direct air capture, or other ways of reclaiming critical minerals for recycling to go into new products, those are all way upstream often in their supply chains. And so I think the difference where we are now than where we were a couple of years ago is that it isn't just about engaging your supplier and asking them to make reductions. It's also, we see companies reaching in and making investments in their supply chains because the dollars are there, because the policies are there, and the interest is there at tackling really hard to decarbonize sectors. And it's those sectors that are often at the pain points of where we see a lot of the climate impacts of electronics. So not only will electronics play a big role in a decarbonized future, but the way that they are made in their value chains, there's a lot more attention and funding and resources and incentives, both regulatory and voluntary, that affect the ability to reduce those emissions. So I'm going to pause there and turn back to Bob before we go to our next speaker.
Raina, thank you. And got just a quick transition question here for you. And before I give you that, just a reminder to the crowd that we will have a Q&A at the end of this, but along the way, if you have questions for individual speakers or for any of the GEC staff, go ahead and enter those into the Q&A part of GoToWebinar. And Raina, I'm really glad you brought up the supply chain aspect of this puzzle, right? That's a big one, Scope 3 emissions. But kind of turning back to the results we saw in that Mentimeter at the beginning, where we saw regulation and policy really sitting high up there versus the I think number 2 under the list after public purchasing incentive or public purchasing leverage as well. Is that, do you see the regulatory landscape continuing to accelerate worldwide where it becomes a driving incentive overall? Does this become a compliance issue, or do you think really the market is going to drive this, or are they equal? Where do you see the demand drivers in terms of priorities for companies?
It's a good question. I think that the regulations will drive attention on making sure that the reporting is robust. And I think a lot of companies will want to make sure they're not liable, or that the reporting is robust. But robust reporting does not necessarily make for progress. And so I think you need incentives and voluntary pressure and transparency so that it's clear who's leading, because then that can become part of the regulatory filing. It'll become clear who's leading and who's lagging based on the actions that they're taking. And so the regulations will drive the transparency piece and the reporting piece and the attention piece, which is, I think, a good thing. I think the question then is how do we make sure that it doesn't just become just another reporting exercise, but that if companies are investing the resources, that this is an opportunity for them to really show where and how they are making significant and lasting changes, and not only reducing their own climate risks and therefore being a more resilient and and stronger company, but that there is just more clarity in the marketplace on what leading action on climate looks like. So the regulatory stuff will always, I think, drive the attention, but we have an opportunity to shape the nature of that narrative and make it productive.
Yeah, fantastic. Verena, thank you. And we'll look forward to welcoming you back for Q&A in just a few minutes. Let's move on now to our next speaker. We can advance the slide. So Tim Moen, partner and director at Boston Consulting Group. Tim is a global leader in climate and sustainability. He's the former CEO of the Global Reporting Initiative, which many people know as GRI, and a veteran of Persephone, Intel, Apple, and AMD. Tim also led the development of key environmental policies at the US EPA and the US Senate. He's a member of the Climate and Sustainability Practice with expertise in ESG disclosure and corporate strategy across industries. Tim, we're excited to have you here today, and I'm going to hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Bob. You left out that I've been a friend of Bob for a very long time, over a few different job changes. I'm so
Absolutely.
pleased to be here. Yes, exactly. And probably many of the webinar attendees as well. I'm so pleased to be here because I'm sure that, we have a lot of friends on the line, and we've all been working in this space for a very, very long time. And so this webinar brings us together, I think, given all of my years of experience in this space, perhaps the most dynamic time I've ever seen in the area of what we now call sustainability or ESG. Verena did a great job of kind of laying out some of the landscape. And what I wanted to do was to sort of give you a sense of the big picture of where we are today, the challenges of where we need to go as an industry tomorrow. Bob laid this out in his great intro, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. BCG recently did a study, and we looked at the overall global climate footprint, and it's actually going up. It's going up by 7% per year when we actually need to be going down. And this is a huge issue. We're about 3 weeks out from the next COP meeting in Dubai. BCG will have a large presence there, and if we meet all of our nationally determined contributions, we'll get on a better path. But right now, that's not the reality. We had another statistic recently that 50%, over half of major companies have now made net zero commitments, which is fantastic. But only 4% of those sort of meet the test of a solid commitment. So we're sort of heading into a little bit of a accountability crisis. Now, how does this all relate to the electronics industry? I've been in this industry a very, very long time, as Bob mentioned. And when you really, and this slide kind of shows a little bit of it, we're always kind of in the center of the crosshairs. We get a lot of attention from NGOs and others. But one of the things that we've always done well in this industry is worked together. Bob came from the Responsible Business Alliance. I used to be the chairman of the board of the RBA. That's like the GEC, brings people together throughout the industry to help us collaborate and basically address these problems as an industry. And I think we will have to as we go forward. BCG worked very closely recently with the semiconductor industry on the next slide, where we actually looked across the entire industry to discover where some of the issues were. This won't surprise anybody on this call, but it's very clearly in our scope 3. Scope 3, if you kind of know the scopes, and I'm pretty sure everybody on this call does, are the emissions in the value chain, upstream in the supply chain, and downstream in the use of sold products. So that's not a surprise to anybody. And then if you look beyond that, we discovered that renewable energy, that access to more renewable energy will actually solve many of our problems going forward, but that it's largely unavailable in many of the geographies where, in this case, semiconductors, but it could relate to the larger industry as well, are made. And then current commitments are great, but we're still going to overshoot our targets. So we actually need to do more. So that's kind of the headline, if you will. And if we go on to the next one, not that one. And if we just keep going, I'll show you. I'm not going to do all these slides, and apologies, we got these in at the last second. But this again will not be a surprise to many, but really the big number here when you look at the entire electronics value chain, is in the use of sold products. And this has been a discovery that we've made many years ago. But by working together, I think in the industry, we're able to kind of get on top of this. When I worked at AMD, for example, we had an energy efficiency goal that they've now renewed. And by working on energy efficiency, we really work on the overall emissions from the sector, but we can only do that by working together. There are many different innovations that require collaboration across the supply chain to decarbonize. And again, it comes back to that collaboration. I'd like to now turn to kind of where that collaboration can take shape. And just picking up on some of the things that Verena said in her remarks. I think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're facing an incredibly dynamic time that's putting pressure on companies from a lot of different angles. Verena mentioned disclosure. We're actually seeing disclosure requirements that are new, coming at us from all different angles. The California laws that were passed just recently, we have 3 different laws that will go far and above what the SEC will require, and that's kind of new, and I think putting pressure on it. But it's kind of creating a squeeze for companies, because on the one hand, we're being asked to disclose more than ever before, but on the other hand, there's more scrutiny than there has ever been on our industry. And the clients we're talking to are sort of in a hunkered down mode. In this industry, in the electronics industry, we have a very proud history of talking about all of the things that we've done and the things we plan to do. I think many companies are sort of pausing on that and saying, well, really, what can we talk about as we get pushed to do more disclosure in our financial reports, and we're getting more pressure for anti-greenwashing and political pressure and such. So that is really kind of creating a squeeze for a lot of companies that makes this work that we have to do even harder. The other thing I'd like to mention going forward is that as we start to work to address these problems, we have different ways that the government is actually working with us. We talked about procurement in the wonderful keynote that started this, but I think there's also incentives coming out of the IRA that this industry can start to take advantage of. That I think that's something that we should work on and potentially get into in the Q&A. And then there's always the tax and trade issues. If you're following this area very closely, we're seeing new carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe that's now live for basic materials going into Europe because they have an emissions trading scheme. But that's going to also flow through to much more complex products like electronics in the future. So these pressures are also starting to manifest on the horizon. And then, finally, it comes back to the collective action. So if I wanted to just sum this up, thank you for that. We are looking at an entire industry here. And I think that the issue in the industry is scope 3. Everybody's scope 1 and 2 is somebody else's scope 3. And so we absolutely have to work together. Collective action is required. But I think it's also scope 4. And if you follow this industry closely, and I know many of you do, scope 4 is the emissions that are created by the products that we sell and the opportunity to reduce emissions by the products that we sell. And so looking at scope 4 and working collaboratively in the industry is another way that we can produce innovation. And I'll just close by saying that having worked in this industry for over 20 years, there's no industry that works better together to collaborate, to innovate, and to actually work towards solving the massive problems that we have. And so I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to the Q&A that we'll have a little later on. I have mentioned, I didn't want to go through a whole slide deck, that we do have a white paper out that's talking about calculating and reporting the scope 3 and scope 4 emissions, and be happy to share that with participants on this webinar. Thank you, and over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Tim. And yeah, feel free to, if you send a link to that to May, she'll get that uploaded in the handouts for us. Tim, I really like you're talking about the collective, right? When back in our work in the what was then the ICC and the RBA, and then groups like GEC and others. I'm curious about your point on this industry, the technology industry, beginning to coalesce around collective action. For a long time, it felt like everybody was competing on getting their net zero goals out first and being the first to market. Do you think we're at a point now where we're beyond the competitive stage around decarbonization and really getting into the pre-competitive work, right, where we can all move the dial together, especially when it comes to scope 3 and 4?
I think that's spot on, Bob, because if I take a step back and look at it this way, if you think about the pandemic, first there was a run on toilet paper, then bicycles, then net zero goals, right? Everybody had to have a net zero goal, and now
Yeah.
I think we're in this sort of maybe an accountability crisis where people are looking at these net zero goals and saying, look, I can't make this without working with others up and down the value chain. And that realization we're starting to see in many of our client meetings. I had a meeting with the executive team of a large company, and we were looking at, instead of offsetting, insetting, like where in our value chain can we actually make changes that will decrease the overall carbon footprint. And again, the rich history going back to the World Semiconductor Council, working on PFCs together, it lowers the cost and increases the benefits for all of us to collaborate in collective action. So I think GEC is well positioned to lead that.
Fantastic, Tim. Thank you. We'll look forward to more in the Q&A. Now we're gonna move to our next panelist, Michael Bloom. So Michael is the High Performance Building Program Advisor with the U.S. General Services Administration. Michael has 22 years of experience at GSA and is the National Program Manager for the Sustainable Facilities Tool, which you can see the URL there, sftool.gov. It's GSA's flagship sustainability website, providing critical tools and best practices to teams that implement high performance buildings and sustainable procurement. Michael, we're so glad to have you here today. I'm going to hand you the floor.
Thrilled to be here. We'll jump right into the next slide. The conversations today have been fantastic so far. I hope to continue that. Playing off of Senior Advisor Harada's remarks, there are a lot of big goals for 2030, 2045 for net zero federal procurement, etc. I'm going to dive into the specifics. Essentially, we are dedicated in our Office of Federal High Performance Green Buildings to making it easier to act and learn what needs to be done at the federal level for buyers, and sharing our knowledge with manufacturers and industry as well. And what you'll see from me today is the set of rules that the federal government has come up with collectively for multiple different agencies that define what is sustainable and the tools we've put together to help buyers actually figure out how to act. We also undergird that by realizing that very few of the people who are actually doing the procurement when it comes to products went to school for sustainability or environmental science, and a lot of the new requirements like those of decarbonization are new, not only in terms of what people need to consider, but new in terms of terminology and a lot of confusing definitions that aren't always gathered in one place. As one of the earlier speakers said, we all know scopes, right? Did we know scopes 4 years ago, 6 years ago? Scope 1, 2, and 3, and which was which? So I'm going to show you a tool that actually is not only for the federal government, but it's open worldwide without login, sftool.gov, to help demystify these things. And not only the general tool that is about sustainable high performance buildings and procurement, but also the green procurement compilation, which is essentially all the rules from EPA, US Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy that make up the constellation of what we consider to be green products, all gathered in one place. So we have all the requirements in one place for purchasers. And then a tool, SF Tool Product Search, that actually helps buyers figure out which products comply with those rules. And along the way, I'm going to also start by sharing a couple resources about the tool in general. So let's go to the next slide. SF Tool is set up so that you can learn, plan, explore, procure, apply, and train folks in sustainability. That's the organization across the top. When we start in the Learn section, the slide on the left, we talk about big topics like climate, energy, water, and health. And the FAR rules that Christine Harada talked about, we also feature things like that under federal requirements in the Learn section in full text. So it's a great place to search first when you're looking for anything about the federal environment and all of the laws and executive orders that are related to it. When it comes to planning, we have full resources to help people understand not just how to plan buildings, but also how to understand concepts like net zero and integrative design. Next slide. Building decarbonization is one topic that we've just built a new module for. It's a 3-part module that tackles decarbonization in general, and the 2 parts, operational carbon and embodied carbon. Now, I don't know about you, I'm a political scientist by training. A lot of these terms and a lot of these ideas are things that I know, but I have a hard time before delving into them, distinguishing between these important terms. At the end of today's presentation, there is an appendix with more definitions of all of the terms that you see here, but go to the page itself. There's a URL at the bottom of every slide to enter the decarbonization module. It's a great module to share with your organizations. Next slide. So when it comes to procurement, I want to show you exactly how we define products and services that are sustainable and where. So on the procure page, next slide. The GPC has 27 main product categories, each with their own sets of rules. It's kind of complicated. Office electronics is one of those. Let's go to the next slide. What we do in this program is we collect all the federal programs, regardless of which agency, all the third-party eco-labels and certifications together, and we allow manufacturers to give us information like pictures and points of contact, creating the largest curated database of compliant high-performance products in the marketplace, which consolidates all that information and also allows multiple rules to play at the same time. Next page. And I'll skip this slide. The office electronics page on the green procurement compilation has 29 subcategories because hotspots are different when you're buying a computer versus, oh, I don't know, printer ink. And those eco-labels involved are Energy Star, EPEAT, BioPreferred, and others. Next slide. So to show you what this actually looks like, if we look for monitors in the green procurement compilation, Energy Star and EPEAT, those elements on the left, are what matter for the federal purchaser. If you click the binoculars on that page, you're taken to a page that gets you to a sorted list of all the products that comply according to the registries. And this is how the federal government relies upon product registries for eco-labels like EPEAT to gain not only what products might comply with our regulations, but actually the data behind the products so we can choose the best ones. And this shows that 2 eco-labels, 60 plus brands, and over 1,600 products are at the end of that rainbow for monitors. Next slide. Also, the same kind of rules in play, EPEAT and Energy Star for desktop computers. We see 2 eco-labels, 9 brands, and 1,176 products. Also noting that our program can sort not just for EPEAT, but for the highest level of EPEAT, which is what the federal government asks for, gold. And this is the gold products that comply. Next slide. So what I've shown you in computers, this is what it looks like using furniture as an example. When we're saying that we gather the data from eco-labels, each piece of data that we gather, we also link to show the buyer the transparency that was talked about at the top of the call about which certifications does this product have, where does the data come from, how fresh is the data, and give the buyer the assurance that what they're about to pull the trigger on when it comes to purchasing does comply with the regulations. And it also gives them the data and know that it's current to actually make decisions about low emissions, especially when EPDs are part of the product data that the eco-labels have gathered. Next slide. So SF Tool Product Search, the third part of the tool that I talked about, is the easy button for green procurement. And one of the things that I want to just pin here is that when people use these tools and do their research through these tools to identify sustainable products, the reporting part of the puzzle is actually done for them, because all of the data behind each of those products and what it complies with and its energy use or water use, if that's what they're buying, comes along for the ride. So it hopefully can not just make learning about sustainability easy and procurement, finding the right thing easy, but also the reporting part of the puzzle easier for buyers, whether they're federal or out in the private sector. And I'll stop there.
All right, Michael, great. Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, this seems like a very powerful tool with, I'm sure, broad reach. And I wanted to just get a feel from you on, are you seeing, especially as as we're learning more about how the climate crisis is accelerating, are you seeing greater pickup internally within federal agencies that may be using this tool on seeking and this type of information to make responsible product selections? Is there an uptick, right, in the demand for these types of products?
There is. The rules about needing to buy these have been in place since 2007 for the most part. So the interest in actually acting upon them and doing that when reporting has been relatively a light ask for feds. There's a very significant uptick, not only in the traffic to sites like ours, but in the interest in understanding how to do it. When it comes to decarbonization, elements like concrete, asphalt, glass, and steel are stealing the limelight right now. But when it comes to refresh cycles, in the built environments, things like carpet, where you buy that a lot in the course of 15 years, and so it adds up. When it comes to technology, I think technology is in the same boat. Making the right decision and an informed decision each time you buy and replace technology is extremely important, because we refresh that so often. And so when we have the tools that we're honing because we're tackling the big stuff like glass, I think we can apply that lens to things like technology right now, use the same tool, and actually act quicker and make an impact in the additive kind of collective way when it comes to how much technology we're purchasing in so many different aspects of buildings and also public life.
Well, I love your use of the word, the easy button. That's one we use here at EPEAT as well, right? Making those connections so that purchasers can make easy selections to be able to purchase goods and services that are climate conscious. So really excited about learning more about this tool, Michael, and I'm sure the audience is as well. And so we're gonna pause with Michael. We'll see him in just a moment for the Q&A, and we're gonna hop across the pond here. Take a look at sustainability procurement catalysts in the EU, specifically the Nordics. We've got Camilla Sederquist here from EPEAT. She's the project manager for sustainability, and she leads the EPEAT sustainability focus, an initiative to leverage the buying power of the Nordic market and take advantage of Nordic's leading position within sustainability to accelerate the sustainable transformation of the global IT sector. Camilla also works as a specialist in circular economy and sustainable procurement in EPEAT. I've had the pleasure personally of working with EPEAT for a number of years, and actually one of their first sustainability focus reports, I was there at the launch, so I recognize the power and the leverage that they have and the influence they bring to bear in one of the most progressive markets. So Camilla, it's a real pleasure to have you here today to see the perspective from your viewpoint. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you and look forward to the discussion coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And I just want to start by saying that I really loved how Tim brought up collaboration, because that's exactly what I will be focusing on as well. But since it's probably not a wild guess that few of you have heard about EPEAT, so just a few words about us. EPEAT is a leading provider of information technology and IT infrastructure solutions in the Nordics. with a focus on the digital workplace, collaboration, data center, and information management. We employ around 8,000 people, and we're represented in Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and the Baltics. And not to brag, or who I'm kidding, I am of course bragging. For 2 years in a row, we have been named the most sustainable IT services company in the world. And we're also number 49 on the list of the 100 most sustainable companies overall. The IT buyers in our market are at the forefront of sustainability. If you ask the industry, they might even call them a pain in the, but jokes aside, the understanding of how procurement can be a tool for change is really high, and they use it to push the bar. But from being mostly a question for procurers, sustainability has increasingly found its way also into the IT department. When I started in the industry about 5 years ago, I used to call IT the sadly unnoticed sustainability issue. But since then, I have witnessed how IT has grown in importance and become, or sustainable IT, I should say, has grown in importance and also become a topic for CIOs. And when you have that kind of alignment internally, interesting things start to happen. And at Atea, we wanted to take advantage of this. We wanted to leverage the power of the Nordic market, this godforsaken corner of the world with so much good to offer. And we were in an especially good position to make that happen. We saw that sustainable transformation needed 2 things, front runners, and here it comes, collaboration. We had the front runners. We also had our position in the ecosystem where we, in terms of our size, are the gateway to the Nordic market for the global IT industry. While at the same time, we can reach out and engage a great number of Nordic IT buyers through our decentralized organization. So we had a golden opportunity to build a unique platform for collaboration. In other words, if we could amplify the voice of the Nordic buyers, the industry would listen. So we founded the Atea Sustainability Focus, or ASF as we call it. And the humble ambition of this initiative is to accelerate the sustainable development of the global IT industry. And we do this by supplying the industry with valuable intel about what the Nordic buyers, the most progressive in the world, remember, prioritize in their procurements and what they expect from the industry. And the industry uses this as a compass or a sensing tool, all according to the motto that if you can satisfy the Nordic buyers, you can satisfy anyone. But unifying the voices of the Nordic buyers wasn't quite enough. There also had to be action behind those voices. And we could see that there sometimes was a gap between the talk and the walk. And for the Nordic buyers to be able to keep pushing the sustainable development of the industry, that gap had to be closed. So together with the most committed buyers, we launched the Leadership for Change, a network that brings together organizations that have vowed to weigh sustainability into every IT purchasing decision. And to increase their impact, members also share knowledge and develop best practices for less mature organizations. And these 2 initiatives now come together in what we call the Game Plan 2030. And this plan is developed in close collaboration, again, collaboration, with the industry and consists of 5 actions that will drive circularity and climate action. And these actions are plug and play, and they come with a reporting framework to assess impact. And 2 of the actions are especially relevant to mention here, and that is to award vendors that have a net zero aligned science-based target, and to increase the share of sourced products that carry an eco label. And this plan will be launched in March. And of course, we will invite buyers outside of the Nordics to take part. So keep an eye out for that. A challenge has been that the carbon footprint from tech has not been viewed as material for many IT buying organizations, and therefore has been left unnoticed. And that is changing fast, and not least thanks to the ambitious EU regulations that you heard from Verena here earlier. We now see an increased demand from buyers to get robust and comparable footprint data of their Scope 3 emissions. And this is a game changer. Scope 3 reporting really puts emissions from IT in harsh light. And when the footprint becomes visible, it will spur action and raise valid concerns about the pace of decarbonization in the supply chain. And this is also the theme of the latest ASF report, Time for Climate Accountability. Here, Nordic buyers send a clear message to the industry and to themselves that there needs to be accountability all the way back to the mine, that we need to stop dabbing and start delivering on the commitments to cut emissions. After all, 90% of the world's emissions are covered by net zero goals, but emissions still keep going up. And the report contains several recommendations, for example, for buyers to set requirements that are in line with science and to reward suppliers' overall progress. So, are the Nordic buyers perfect? Well, far from it. For one, they can be even better at implementing the recommendations they develop through the ASF to create more effective feedback loops. But they can also be better at two things that are crucial for bringing emissions down, and that is to use products for longer and to increase the recovery of used products. And I will stop there. Thank you. Over to you, Bob.
Camilla, thank you so much. Always fascinating to hear about the Nordic market and a little bit more, very progressive. And, you know, like you said, there's always room for improvement, right? I think you mentioned this here at the end, that even the best are still really pushing, and you kind of begin to broach that subject there at the end. Do you see, you know, in terms of taking the next big leap, right, from, you know, being progressive to being sort of continuing to stay ahead of the pack, I guess, from a region that's really trying to push the envelope? Do you see even more that the Nordic region can do in this space?
Well, absolutely. Apart from what I just mentioned, we also see that surprisingly many of the requirements put forth in procurements are vague. It's about requiring that the supplier should have actively try to decrease their emissions and so forth, instead of requiring a concrete goal for absolute emission reductions or showing that they've actually reduced emissions throughout the years, and something that's more easy to verify and also more concrete. And we also hear that from the industry, that you want to have clear requirements and transparency around what you value. And we also see that when you look at individual products, there's a lot of focus on details in products about plastics in peripherals and so forth. And we really try to advocate that, for example, to use eco labels to get that comprehensive you know, verification that this is a product that is produced to the best standards that there are out there. So those are the things that we can push even more in our market.
Yeah. And do you see demand or hunger from those purchasers to have more clear signals specifically on climate within you know, areas like eco labels and other signals that companies are sending?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. It's been a lot of focus around circularity in the Nordics, and I think 3 of our 6 ASF reports that we produced so far has been on circularity, but it's so closely linked.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, so absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, super. And I encourage everybody in the attendee list here and the participants to get a chance to read the EPEAT Sustainability Focus reports. And Camilla, feel free also to send a link to May so we can get that uploaded to the handout section, and the audience can learn from it as well. So I'd like to ask our panelists. Oh, great, fantastic. We'll go ahead and get that uploaded. So let's have our panelists all turn on their cameras if you're able, and we're going to move into the Q&A section here for just a few minutes. So we got Michael, we got Verena, Tim, and Camilla. Fantastic panel, very dynamic, and excited to be able to talk a bit more here. So first I'll turn to the crowd Q&A. First is for Verena, but I think it really, I pose this both to Verena and Tim. It says, thank you for excellent questions. We'd like to know more about the incentives available to electronic manufacturers to augment and improve the supply chain. So I think we touched on this a bit, and if there's any more color you can provide around specifically supply chain and those incentives to electronic manufacturers, I think that would be interesting for the audience. I think Tim, you might be on mute.
Yeah. I am on mute.
There we go.
Thank you. How many times do we say that a day? Well, anyway, I'm not aware of any incentives per se. Mostly it's the opposite side. We have the carrots and the sticks, and unfortunately in this case it's more sticks. I mentioned some of the carbon border adjustment mechanisms that we're seeing. There's a new bill that just got dropped on Capitol Hill, notably from 3 GOP senators, to put up a US carbon tax as well. But those kinds of things are now actually sort of snapping people into action, looking at, what is the carbon intensity of our products that go back and forth across national borders. We really have to pay attention to this. Some companies are even putting in an internal price on carbon so they can, hold these decarbonization products or projects up against the same ROI hurdle that other projects have to meet. So in this case anyway, it's mostly dealing with the costs, not so much the incentives, which is unfortunate. I would like to see more incentives. I don't know, Verena, if you have a different take on that one.
No, I think Tim said it really well. I don't know of any incentives for suppliers per se, other than the threat of regulation and the nudge of procurement. So if you combine those two, then that'll be a good squeeze and a not as good squeeze. But actually, when I think about regulation, it's really meant to bring up the floor. So I would view these as an opportunity for suppliers to take actions that make them a more competitive business, so that they can then be poised and positioned to respond to procurement requests. But it's really upon the market to demand and to continue to want the supply chains to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and become more resilient.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you for both of you. And it seems like, with that sort of slight vacuum of pure incentives, that may be a place for advocacy work as well, to create that smart mix to drive behavior, right, within to address scope 3 and 4. I'll move on to, there are some specific questions here for Michael on the SF tool. So I'll cycle through a few of these. So Michael, the first one says many of the companies coming up in some of the example slides are big companies who often have resources, right? How can smaller companies with fewer resources find leverage?
Any company that manufactures a product that complies with the rules set in the Green Procurement Compilation and is registered by those eco-labels shows up in the feed. So the only hurdle that they need to jump is being certified by the eco-labels that the federal government's looking at. There's no pay to play in the process when it comes to the government. We're just looking at the eco-labels that are required. So while when it comes to monitors that are EPEAT Gold, I acknowledge that in the electronics industry, those are few and far between, and that you do see the big companies there. If you search SF Tool for other things like light bulbs or furniture, you'll see the smallest mom and pop shop that has certified products pop up right alongside of the big ones.
Yeah, so it sounds like the platform is inclusive. It's a matter of the market to begin to drive and populate a tool that's available for them. Yeah.
Correct. And the federal government acknowledges that things like EPDs are expensive for companies to actually provide, which is why EPA has multiple millions of dollars to help through grants, help companies actually get those. So that's another way that when we go towards EPDs, that kind of more expensive investment on the part of manufacturers can be supported.
Yeah, fantastic. So not off the hook yet, Michael. A couple more questions for you, and I'll combine these because I think they're sort of similar in terms of the climate features of the SF tool. So one says, when will the climate module filter appear on the sftool.gov? And the other one is asking, I know EPEAT Climate Plus is new, and so there's possibly consideration on how to build that into SF Tool, but it's asking, whether or not the SF Tool will rank EPEAT Climate Plus products differently than standard EPEAT products. For instance, would a EPEAT Bronze Climate Plus product rank higher than the standard product as well? Yeah.
So like many of you on this call, I'm also learning about EPEAT Climate Plus and the details behind it. I'm certainly open to including that data as part of the tool moving forward. And how we usually do that is as a pilot, like other filter first to see how well it works, to make sure it doesn't conflict with the EPA recommended specifications, standards, and eco-labels that we are in lockstep with. So we're happy to work with EPEAT and see how we can disclose data. When it comes to the first part of that question, we can only sort things when we have good data behind the categories. And so when it comes to a carbon filter or a climate filter, it's really a question of how many products actually and manufacturers have the capacity to supply the validated data that you'd need in order to make a decision based upon it. And so we move slowly there, but I can absolutely see putting those kinds of filters into SF Tool when the data is there to support them.
Fantastic, thank you. Last question I think we have in the chat box here. Actually, we did get a few more, so let's take this one's for Camilla. You mentioned that IT departments are now aware of the need for sustainable procurement decisions. Do you see the same awareness at the end of those products' useful life? So I think we're beginning to talk about circularity here. And are IT departments considering their impact in the way they will deal with their used IT equipment?
Yes, absolutely. And that's also something that we've been driving really hard from Matthias' perspective, as that's one of the most important measures that you can do as an IT buying organization or IT using organization, is to make sure that your used IT is recovered after use. So it's a lot of focus on that in the Nordics, and the Matthias competition is tough in that department. But so we really see a lot of focus on that, and we're also driving that. Make sure that you sort of buy circulars, so that when you to include in your request for tenders also an option for or requirements on your vendors to be able to recover the products after use, so that you have a plan. When you buy things, you already have a plan for what will happen to them at the end of life.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Well, I'll give the floor to each of you here in just a moment to just give sort of any sort of parting thoughts you have as we're closing up the session here. But a reminder to everybody here coming up, we will have another Mentimeter here in just a moment as we get into learning a little bit more about EPEAT Climate Plus. It's come up a few times, and then we're going to move into the session with Patty Dillon. But I'll start at the top here. Verena, any closing thoughts for the audience as we end the session?
The only thing I would say is that as we look at all the levers that companies have, and all the pressures that are coming on companies to really be thinking about decarbonization more holistically, that is the frame that companies should keep in mind and that procurement officials should keep in mind as we are looking to advance climate action through procurement. There's this bigger picture that exists where procurement has a definite role, but being aware of the other levers are really important because then you can kind of fine tune where and how to use procurement to advance those goals.
Right. It's a whole system of balance, right? Tim, your closing thoughts here.
Yeah, I think we said it, just to sum up, I mean, this is a hugely dynamic time. All of a sudden, the work we've done for many, many years has hit that mainstream. And it's because climate change in particular is the most threatening thing we've ever seen as even a species. Yeah. And when we look at it as an industry, it's scope 3. We know it's scope 3, and scope 3 demands collective action. We all have to work together to get on top of that. I've worked in this industry for so long. I know we can come together. I know we can do it. But the last thing I'll say that is maybe a little bit new, it's not just about protecting risk, which we absolutely have to do. This industry is an innovation engine. And if we look at climate change as an opportunity, as a problem that we can apply our core competencies to help solve. I mean, we're all sitting here on a webinar. We would have flown to this meeting 10 years ago, but we're doing this through the technology that our companies have created. And so that's just a small example of where we could take this, looking at it as an opportunity and helping to decarbonize the world as a solution. So I'm excited to be here, and I think that you're on the right track.
Yeah, well said, Tim. Yeah, both the solution, we're looking at the problem here today, but also recognizing the tremendous potential for technology to help us with this crisis as well. Michael, any last thoughts for the audience as we're closing up?
The same vein as Tim's, climate is a huge challenge, but we need to empower rather than disempower people when we talk about how big that challenge is. And so that means pushing the training and the knowledge and the ability to act down to the people who are actually helping agencies or companies achieve their missions, which means that we can't just know what we're talking about as leaders or policymakers. We actually have to help the implementers, the people actually purchasing things or making decisions, who go to work every day saying, I need to satisfy this purchase request for this other office, and that's my job. Know that sustainable characteristics are not something to be afraid of and to say none apply and move on, but actually say, let me do my job to actually make a difference in terms of slowing climate change or reducing emissions by doing this work and that I now understand. So I think making sure that our folks at every level understand what they can do about climate is something that we can all act together to achieve.
Yeah, I like that a lot, that we can actually in our daily jobs, right, in our decision making and lives for that matter, actually participate and seeing tools like yours be able to provide the foundation for that. Camilla, just giving you last remarks here before we move on to some other exciting content, but I'll give you the floor for some comments.
I'm honored, and I don't know what more to add from all these smart panelists, fellow panelists. But I again would like to highlight the importance and also collaboration. I mean, it's a word we use a lot in sustainability when we talk about sustainability, but it really is important. And to collaborate internally between the procurement department, the sustainability department, and the IT department, and collaborate with your peers and also with the industry representatives to get the dialogue going. It's really important, and that's how we create impact on a large scale.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank Verena, Tim, Michael, Camilla enough for taking the time today, giving us your perspectives, inspiring us. It's a great start to this discussion, and looking forward to continuing the work together. So thanks again.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right. Well, now we're going to move on. A quick, before we move into the EPEAT Climate Plus discussion, we're just going to do a quick poll. If you could log in to menti.com, use the code 49613345. We're actually interested in how many folks have heard about EPEAT Climate Plus. We launched this back in September 30th. This is really, today through this webinar, and then a reception afterwards, which we'll talk about at the end of the webinar. We really kind of got this off the ground, and it's accelerated quickly already. You'll hear from Patty, and then again from some purchasing leaders, as well as Susan Herbert from our Eco Labels team, about how quickly this has taken off and been embraced both by the manufacturer and purchaser side. But we're interested in how aware are you of EPEAT Climate Plus? Very aware, just getting to know it. I've heard of it, but not much, or this is really my very first exposure. And so if you can, again, log into menti.com, type in that code. Okay, we're starting to get some results here. It looks like, balance, we're very aware and getting to know it, but also some that you're just learning about it, right? And Patty, I think this gives you the floor to say you've got some experts here already on EPEAT Climate Plus, but we can always learn more, right? But also some that are hungry for some information. So I'll hand it over to you to be able to tell us more about this great product designation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bob. And also thanks to our panelists for your insightful remarks. It really sets the stage for the imperative before us, but also where are the impacts, what are the strategies we might use, and including the expectations and power of purchasers, the need for collective action. Love it all. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce you today to EPEAT's Climate Plus program, which is a new product designation that GEC launched on September 30th. And it's based on our recently published climate criteria. Now, as many of you participating today are aware, GEC, we're in the midst of a major multi-year update of our sustainability criteria. Initially, we planned to hold our climate criteria, which were published in the spring, implement them within EPEAT when the full set of updated criteria, which includes circularity, chemicals, responsible supply chains, in addition to climate, we were going to launch the climate criteria when all the criteria were complete. But GEC, we heard an overwhelming cry from government policy, purchasers, and sustainability advocates that decarbonizing the supply chain was all too important of an issue to wait. And they wanted EPEAT's new climate criteria to launch as soon as possible. And as a result of this demand, we said, okay, we can step up to this challenge. And the demand for more progressive climate criteria now. So we went and created this new EPEAT Climate Plus product designation. So next slide. So at GEC, we believe that eco labels, and in particular EPEAT, has a real valuable role to play in driving decarbonization of electronics. And I think we heard today from several of our speakers, our panelists, and keynote about the role of eco labels. So eco labels are real kind of special. We define leadership performance requirements throughout the life cycle of products. Our requirements are based on science. You can go look at our state of sustainability research, for example, that set the science behind what we're trying to achieve. And then EPEAT, we provide manufacturers with a clear set of performance specs to design to, and also a rigorous independent conformity assurance system that ensures that the sustainability performance requirements that are established with our criteria are actually met. And this in turn provides purchasers with a simple way, as we say, and I think Michael said as well, the easy button to specify and secure more sustainable products that contribute to the sustainability goals of purchasing organizations. So with the EPEAT, the new EPEAT Climate Plus product designation, manufacturers have a new and a credible way, because the performance requirements are verified that they're meeting the requirements, so they can have a credible way now to demonstrate to purchasers that the products they are putting on the market, as well as the corporate activities, their collective activities that contribute to carbon emissions, they're actually contributing to decarbonization. So next slide. So let's look a little bit deeper into Climate Plus. What does it mean? So EPEAT Climate Plus, first of all, is a product level designation. It's for EPEAT registered products that meet the climate related criteria, but also the other EPEAT criteria. When companies actually meet the Climate Plus product designation, they can be recognized as Climate Plus champions on the EPEAT website. So we're excited that in the month since we launched Climate Plus, we already have 9 Climate Plus champions, which we're going to hear more from later in the webinar. And we have over 1,200 unique products with the Climate Plus designation. So we're only at the beginning and it's going to grow. So the performance requirements, what does it mean to be Climate Plus? So on the graphic that's on the right of the screen summarizes high level what the Climate Plus requirements are. So if you start at the top and moving clockwise. So first, we heard a bit from the speakers and about the need for data and verification of the footprint, for example, and the scope 3 and the corporate greenhouse gas emissions. So manufacturers must analyze their carbon emissions at the corporate and the product levels, publicly disclose the data, but only after it's been independently verified. And then they also have to establish carbon reduction goals that are based on climate science. The manufacturers then also, that's all well and good, transparency, becoming more knowledgeable about your emissions, setting goals, but then we also ask manufacturers to begin to take action to reduce their supply chain carbon emissions using proven best practices, including we know that by improving the energy efficiency within manufacturing operations, we can reduce carbon emissions. As we actually heard from Tim, the power of using electricity from renewable sources and what we can achieve there, and also reducing fluorinated greenhouse gases in manufacturing. I believe Christina in her keynote actually mentioned that they are really potent greenhouse gases and we can take continued action to reduce those emissions. And finally, Climate Plus also requires the product energy efficiency, such as conformance with Energy Star. So next slide. So here we have, well, first I should say that the climate criteria are available for download on the EPEAT website, and I believe that we also have uploaded the, yep, there they are, the climate criteria are also available in the chat window and in these webinar handouts. So these criteria, I just want to say a little bit about how they were developed, because GEC, we don't develop our criteria in a vacuum. We actually develop the science first behind the sustainability impacts and what are the best practices to reduce those impacts. And then we actually bring together a group of experts to participate in a voluntary consensus process. Experts from industry, government policy, sustainability advocates, as well as purchasers. And we actually pull these people together to help define what does it mean to be leadership, what are the best practices, and how do we actually take action both from the product and the supply chain perspective. So for products to attain the EPEAT Climate Plus designation, you know, we have a whole suite of criteria that were developed in our voluntary consensus process. But Climate Plus specifically today requires that manufacturers have to meet all required criteria. They're also encouraged to continue the journey towards climate and decarbonization and begin work on the optional criteria. But right now, we're not requiring manufacturers to meet the optional criteria, at least for this initial launch of Climate Plus. But know that we recognize this as a journey. We can't actually today have all the practices in place, and so we have to provide a roadmap for a journey towards sustainability and climate reduction or decarbonization. So here you see a list of the required climate criteria. They address the topics that I showed on the previous slide, but on this slide, I've just organized them a little differently. The criteria are organized here by criteria that apply to the company and its overall carbon emissions, and then to the product itself. You have, for example, again, based on the broad buckets that I discussed on the prior slide, you have for the company, manufacturers are required to prepare and have third-party verified carbon disclosures, and they also have to set carbon reduction targets based on climate science. Manufacturers also have to take action to reduce the carbon emissions by employing renewable energy or electricity sourced from renewable energy at manufacturer facilities. And they have to communicate requirements to their major suppliers of high embodied carbon components, such as integrated circuits, circuit boards, display panels, power supplies, etc., to reduce the facility energy consumption. And then at the product level, manufacturers must have a third-party verified product carbon footprint that identifies the carbon emissions at each life cycle phase, so they can begin to fine-tune and see where the greatest impact is and the greatest opportunities to reduce impacts. And then the criteria also address use phase carbon with requirements, for example, for Energy SAR compliance, as well as energy efficient external power supplies and battery charging systems, if applicable. So I encourage you to go ahead and download the document. You'll see that the criteria are extremely detailed and provide a lot of parameters around how to actually calculate carbon emissions and verification of those carbon emissions and disclosure, etc. Next slide. So as part of Climate Plus, GEC, it's great that we have the product designations and folks can see those products that are meeting the more progressive climate criteria, but we also thought it was really important to actively engage purchasers to really help send a clear and amplify the signal to the market of the importance of decarbonization of the supply chain. So we actually have created a complementary GEC Climate Plus pledge that recognizes organizations committed to purchasing and promoting EPEAT Climate Plus products. Somewhat of a tongue twister at times. Organizations can pledge to be EPEAT Climate Plus purchasing leader, and purchasing leaders commit to reducing their carbon footprint by choosing Climate Plus products. We also created a second pledge category because we recognize that all purchasers or influencers don't necessarily directly purchase products, but they have a role to play in building the awareness in the industry of the availability of more climate-friendly products. So we have the second category was EPEAT Climate Plus purchasing advocates, and they essentially pledge to promote the adoption of EPEAT Climate Plus among stakeholders and peers. And I'm really excited that the upcoming panel will actually, we have some new signatories of the pledge, which is awesome. So next slide. So here I just want to show you that EPEAT Climate products currently available are in 5 EPEAT product categories as shown here. And it's important to note that EPEAT Climate Plus is an additional designation. All EPEAT registered products must continue to meet the existing EPEAT criteria that cover a broad range of sustainability impacts, including circularity, chemicals, responsible supply chain, etc. So EPEAT product would continue to be recognized as bronze, silver, and gold, and then you have that added designation. So you would have EPEAT Gold Climate Plus, etc. So a basic EPEAT Climate Plus means they meet EPEAT and the others, and then if it's accompanied by bronze, silver, or gold, you know what % of optional criteria they meet beyond that. So if you're a purchaser interested in driving decarbonization, think about raising awareness of EPEAT Climate Plus, flagging them on your buying platforms, or giving preference, etc. So next slide. So just quickly, how to find EPEAT registered Climate Plus products. So here are some screenshots. There's 2 ways. There's actually a button on the website that allows you to search directly for Climate Plus products as shown at the top, and that'll provide a list of all products in every category, and you can then filter that search by manufacturer or product category. You can also search Climate Plus products within each category. All Climate Plus products are clearly flagged by the green plus designation. I encourage you to check it out. Next slide. And just to close out here, I just wanted to give a quick announcement that Climate Plus will expand early next year to include EPEAT's photovoltaic product category. We recently released our new low embodied carbon criteria that establish a maximum threshold for embodied carbon in our solar panels. And this includes the greenhouse gas emissions throughout the manufacturer supply chain. So we're really excited to introduce these new low carbon criteria that will allow purchasers to identify low embodied carbon solar panels and further decarbonize the electronic supply chain. So please stay tuned for that. And I think with that, we're going to head into a break. I encourage everybody to, we'll handle questions later if you have them. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. I'll let everyone stretch their legs, grab more coffee, etc. And then after the break, we have a great panel discussion led by my GEC colleague, Emmanuel Nuoto. And he'll be joined by several organizations on the forefront of sustainable purchasing. So we'll get started again at I believe 11, is it 11:45? Great, thank you. See you all in a little while.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this exciting session, Activating Purchasing Power in Decarbonizing Technology. Once again, my name is Emmanuel Modo, and I'm honored to be your moderator. We have an esteemed group of panelists here to shed some light on this crucial topic. Today, we'll explore how our choices as consumers and organizations can significantly impact the adoption of climate-conscious technologies. Our discussions will revolve around the pivotal role of purchasing power in accelerating the transition to cleaner and more sustainable solutions. We have three amazing presenters today. First will be Julia Wolf, who is the Director of Environmental Purchasing at Massachusetts Operational Services Division. Next will be Elizabeth Eldridge, the Director of Sustainable Sourcing at Kaiser Permanente. And finally, we have Charlene Van Kessler, the Standards and Quality Control Chief in the California State Department of General Services Engineering Branch. I'd love to shed some light that since the launch of GEC Climate Plus, we have an accelerated uptick in organizations that have committed to addressing climate change through their technology procurement. We're excited to have two of our signatories in the panel today, and we aim to provide you with valuable insights, actionable takeaways, and deep understanding of how we can collectively harness our purchasing power for a more sustainable future. Before we start, let's review some important information regarding how our format will be and how you can actively participate in this session. Today's session will comprise, like I mentioned, 3 presentations, each expertly delivered. After all the presentations, we'll open the floor for a Q&A session. Your questions are invaluable, so please share them. If you have questions for a specific presenter, kindly use the chat feature and I'll facilitate these questions. Like I said, your participation is highly encouraged. After the Q&A, we'll transition into a dynamic roundtable discussion during which our panelists will share a thoughtful conversation on the topics we've covered today. While this segment is not open for audience questions, we encourage you to take notes and consider any questions you may have that will be shared with the presenters later. Now with that, let's get ready for our first presentation. Remember, prepare those questions for the Q&A and let's make today's event insightful and engaging. Please join me in warmly welcoming our first presenter, Julia Wolf. She is the Director of Environmental Purchasing at Massachusetts Operational Service Division. In her role, she integrates sustainable specifications in statewide contracts, administers Executive Order 515, and co-chairs the Toxic Reduction Task Force. Julia's environmental purchasing work has resulted in award-winning multi-state procurement for environmentally preferable cleaning products, resulting in over $160 million in counting. I'd like to also share that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts OSD is the first organization to sign the GC pledge as an EPEAT Climate purchasing advocate, showcasing its commitment to climate change. Take it away, Julia.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. So thanks for inviting me to speak today on this webinar. I'm really honored. So I run the Environmentally Preferable Products Procurement Program. Oh, actually, you can go to the next slide. Sorry. And you can go to the next slide. There we go. So I run the Environmentally Preferable Products Procurement Program. I've been in this role for about 12 years now. And I just want to give you a bit of information about us. We're the state agency that sets up and manages statewide contracts for goods and services. And we have over 100 statewide contracts, over $2 billion in spend. And there's actually 18 IT-related contracts in our portfolio. And I just want to note that we don't purchase anything except directly related to the running of our agency, but we set up these things called master agreements that all of our executive agencies are required to use, and that all other public entities that are listed on the slide, they're able to use, but they're not required. So we have a robust environmental purchasing program that's been around for close to 30 years, and we work off of an executive order that was signed in 2009 to establish an environmental purchasing policy for the Commonwealth. And OSD administers this executive order, and we report annually on our progress. Next slide, please. And yes, we are thrilled to report that we just became a Climate Plus advocate. So we're really happy to be in this role. Next slide, please. And a fun fact, OSD was actually on the original EPEAT Certification Development Committee in early 2000. So we've been committed to EPEAT for years. And the reason we got involved is to help find a way to make it easier for purchasers to find and purchase environmentally preferable IT. So EPEAT, provides this framework for evaluating and selecting electronics that have a reduced life cycle environmental impact. And GEC has really been instrumental in developing draft specs for sustainable IT that we've integrated into our IT hardware and imaging equipment contracts. And we add EPEAT specs into contracts as new products are added to the registry, such as servers, solar, and more. And because GEC is now taking this step of going further with the Climate Plus program, it really makes it easier to find those products that help decarbonize the supply chain and promote the use of renewable energy. So we are helping advocate to our buyers to choose these products. Next slide, please. So here is our reporting for fiscal year 22 on EPEAT registered products. And we love the way we are able to quantify the environmental benefits using the EPEAT calculator. I'm a big fan. And we're able to share this with our constituents and our buyers. And we'll be documenting the Climate Plus products as well in future reporting. So next slide, please. So our annual reporting document documents environmental products and service spend, savings, reductions in metric tons of carbon equivalent, and tons of waste diverted from recycling. And EPEAT is the metrics for EPEAT are really a large part of our reporting. And this is the data from our fiscal year 22 annual report. And I'm actually working on the fiscal year 23 data right now. Next slide. So climate action is a major focus of Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. And in fact, her first act as governor was signing Executive Order 604 to establish the first ever Governor Climate Cabinet position. And so we're working very closely with Climate Chief Hoffer. And she recognizes how important procurement is for climate. And in fact, she just published an 85-page document of recommendations for the Commonwealth and outlines a call to update procurement practices to require disclosure of emissions and climate risk. So in my agency, OSD, we have a new climate initiative that we started months ago. We've always been sort of considering climate in a lot of our product selection, and we've been focusing on all of our contracts to advance opportunities for products and services that provide climate benefits. But we're also working on developing a climate vendor scorecard to evaluate climate risks and to push our vendors to do more in this area. Next slide. So that's actually it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is amazing, Juliet. We really appreciate all the work. Thank you for this comprehensive and engaging expose on sustainable procurement and for your decades of advocating for sustainable change. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go over to our next presenter. Perfect. Our next presenter is Elizabeth Eldridge. She is the Director of Sustainable Sourcing for Kaiser Permanente's Impact Spending Program. She's focused on reducing the environmental footprint of healthcare and is responsible for developing and executing sustainable procurement strategy components of Kaiser Permanente's total health mission. She and her team also deliver contextual business intelligence to multiple levels of both internal and external stakeholders in support of impact spending's social, environmental, and economic impact pillars. In 2023, Kaiser Permanente achieved tremendous energy savings and emissions reductions by purchasing EPEAT products. They saved over $11 million and reduced greenhouse gas emissions by over 60 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Prior to her role with the National Supplier Diversity, Elizabeth was the business intelligence manager with PeopleSoft, which is now Oracle Corporation. There, she designed and implemented applications to provide business intelligence to develop, support, management, and quality assurance teams. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us.
Great, thank you for having me. And I think we have some slides. There we go, and you could go one more. So again, I'm from Kaiser Permanente. I feel like I'm an organization a little bit different than everybody that's come before me. For those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, we're the nation's largest nonprofit integrated health system, focused on improving health, especially preventative measures of improving health. And this is just a little snapshot to show we're big. We've got 39 hospitals and 62 medical centers. We've got 12.7 million members and lots of physicians and nurses, employees. So sizable organization, which is important from the procurement perspective. Next slide. And our footprint is in various spots of the United States. So we started in California. We're a California-based company. We have facilities and members along the West Coast, and then on the East Coast in the Mid-Atlantic region, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, a little bit of Georgia, and then that nice standout in the middle of Colorado, and then Hawaii down in the beginning. So footprint across the United States, again, just kind of gives you an idea of the size of our organization. Next slide. So whoops, I think we missed one in the middle, but that's okay. So as a healthcare organization, again, our mission is to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. And so improving the health of those communities also includes improving the environmental health, because we can't have healthy people, healthy members, if they're in communities and in environments that are unhealthy, exposed to pollution or the effects of waste or chemical exposure or things like that. So we have a real focus on the environmental aspects of the goods we buy and the things we do, again, in order to drive that community and member health aspect. So we have been focused on clean and healthy communities for a long time. I just gave a presentation a couple of days ago with kind of a timeline showing from 1945 when we started to now about all the different work we've done in terms of clean environment and healthy communities. And from the very beginning, our organization has been focused on environmental type issues. Early on, it was more on pollution and worker safety, but over time, we focused on, again, chemicals of concern and waste that's generated, and all the other aspects of our operations and the products we purchase and our supply chain and everything that impact the environment. So we have some pretty rigorous goals that were set in 2015, and these three things on the screen are just a couple of the pieces of that goal in the areas that I specifically focus on. But we really want to make sure that the products we use in our facilities and expose our members and patients and employees to are as safe as they can be. So we have a goal to make sure at least 50% of what we buy does meet internal environmentally preferable purchasing criteria that were developed years ago. We want to make sure that the things we buy aren't generating a lot of waste, both in their manufacture, but also in their use and disposal on our side. And specifically, we want to eliminate hazardous waste. And then most recently, we set a goal around reducing our climate emissions. We've been climate neutral for a couple of years now, and now we're working on the emissions around our supply chain, trying to reduce those by 50% by the 2030 and to get to net zero by 2050. And so all these goals require us to really look at what we're buying. And as you might imagine, I showed that map and the earlier numbers about how big we are. We buy a lot of stuff, including a lot of electronic stuff, especially everyone working at home. You've got your monitor, you got your computer. In the offices, there were printers and scanners and faxes. And we have big server farms and lots of electronic equipment. And so all those have an emissions potential, and that's something that we're trying to reduce. And so EPEAT has been the way that we've focused on that particular area of our purchase and to try and drive change. I know we've been recognized by with EPEAT awards, or yeah, I guess I call them awards. Since I think the program has started, we just moved out of our office and happen to have all the little trophies lined up one after the other. So it's great to be recognized for our works in that area. But more important, it's great that the EPEAT is there so that we have criteria that we can use when looking to purchase equipment. And the addition of the climate to the EPEAT label is really aligned with the goals that we have and what we're trying to do, which is not only reduce chemicals of concern and waste, but really reduce the climate impacts of the products we buy. And looking at kind of the goals of EPEAT and the goals that we have internally, there's really close alignment, because we're looking for products that use energy efficiently in their manufacturing and use materials efficiently, don't waste a lot of resources in their development. We want products to have extended life cycles so that we're not constantly buying things and then having to dispose of them. We want products to be repairable and recyclable. And what was really great about the Climate Plus is to have verifiable greenhouse gas disclosures. All of this gives us the information we need to be able to buy products that are the most environmental preferable of what's available out there. And apologies if you can hear the dog in the background, but she concurs. And I think that's the last slide I had. Right, okay. So let me stop there.
Thank you for sharing your story and showing that sustainable procurement and climate change stretches across various sectors. We really appreciate you for joining us today. And our final presentation for this session, before we start our panel, is from Charlene Kessler. Charlene is the Standards and Quality Control Chief, the engineering branch of the California State Department of General Services. She guides and directs state buyers to incorporate sustainability into public procurement. She helps establish policy and manages implementation of California's environmental preferable purchasing program and the Buy Clean California Act. She possesses decades of experience participating in several multi-stakeholder initiatives, including the US EPA's Eco-Label program, UNEP's Sustainable Public Procurement Report publication. And I also really want to acknowledge that the California State Department of General Services is one of the pioneer organizations to sign the GEC Climate Plus Pledge as an EPEAT Climate Plus purchasing leader. This is showcasing their desire to address climate change with their purchasing power. Thank you for joining us, Charlene.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Next slide, please. The state of California, I want to talk about who we are and what actions we take. Specifically, procurement, we're a centralized function, and we write the policies and procedures for all of the state of California state agencies. With that, with the policies, we also have the large leveraged procurement agreements, which include the electronics. Next slide, please. So how do we implement our strategies? Well, first we need statute. It gives us the authority to do the actions that we need to take. And that comes in the public contract code. But then we also have goals. And I'm going to briefly go over what we do here so that we can leave more open for the question period of the panelists. But our goals, one of the goals of California is to slash 85% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And how we measure that and track that, if you go to the California green.ca.gov, you can see all of our metrics, from our vehicles, our ZEV program that's been implemented for over a decade, to our green buildings, which also requires our state agencies to report sustainability programs, to our green purchasing, where you can see the metrics and our achievements, and also those things that we still need to achieve. There's a lot of information in there. Procurement's changing, laws change quickly, but you can stay up to date by going to the green.ca.gov. We also provide training for our state procurement officers, and we included our executive officers in that because training is important. We also look at guiding. We have a Buying Green guide. The federal government has the SF tool. We're working on a tool currently, so there's still more to come. But for now, we have the Buying Green guide. And in there, you can go to the actual contracts that we've written, the specifications, the actual laws and regulations that pertain to that commodity. And so we've also provided you a link for that. When you have more time and you can really drill into the plethora of information we can provide, it's a great resource. So the policy, we have a lot of policy that's coming up that has to be being written. But for most importantly is we've been working on the executive order in 1919, and that's specifically to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this climate, EPEAT Climate Plus is really going to support those efforts. And when we have a leveraged procurement agreement, which is important, is we make it a mandatory agreement. So all of our statewide computer contracts, they are mandatory. So we can actually write all the specification and drill down and reduce impacts within with each purchase. And we track that through our enterprise service program, which is called the FISCAL. Next slide, please. So here are some of the goals that we've achieved. We have also been part of the EPEAT awards process for several years. This is the most recent. We have these metrics also written on the green.ca.gov website. The procurement amount that we purchase changes from year to year based on demand. I'm sure all of us noticed in the last couple of years with COVID, with the transition to hybrid work places, that we had a huge spike in laptops where we may not have that spike down. So it's important to not look just at the year, but how are we making change to reduce impacts and the energy use and supporting green buildings itself. Again, our requirements, we require EPEAT as a mandatory requirement. Next slide. So how does it drive, electronic can drive innovation? We've been looking at and actually implementing strategies to reduce plug load, which is your energy use of your contracts, for years. And what the EPEAT registry does is it allows us to focus and streamline our processes to validate contracts, and move the process along so that we can have more tools and resources for our staff to procure from. So it also allows a central a measuring stick, so we ensure that there's competition and that we also look at performance. These are all important when we ask for our products of what we purchase. So it just raises industry. It looks to bring industry together, to work together to help the purchasers. And we have, you know, in the future, we're looking at continuous innovation. It's not just going to be the products, it's going to be what actions that suppliers and manufacturers take to really look holistically on reducing impacts. And it's more of a looking at decentralization of procurements and how we can train them, other purchasers and organizations to help innovate change. So these are just, again, a quick overview of what the state of California does, and I look forward to talking to everyone in the panel. Thank you. Now, please do check out our websites, links that we provided.
Yes, please utilize all the resources that we have in the chat. And thank you so much, Charlene, for sharing the great mission that your organization has been on and how it's continuing to proceed in sustainable procurement, sustainable purchasing, and a greater focus on climate change. Your work does not go unnoticed, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to open up for the rest of the panelists to turn on their camera and come back on screen and turn on their mics. We do have, before we jump into our panel, we do have some questions. The first question, since you just finished off, Charlene, I'll push it over to you. California just passed the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, SB 253. How does GEC's EPEAT Climate Plus align with this act?
That's a great question. There's a lot to be to achieve. So most importantly is the carbon accountability, right? Looking at corporations and what they do to reduce their emissions through the supply chain, through the whole life cycle of an actual product. So that's how it's going to support us. It will align with that. And the actual specifics of it will come right now, if the organizations, they have to have their plans in place by the end of the year, because they'll start having to account for their carbon within the next year and report the year after. So those manufacturers that have taken an advance notice to start this are way set to meet those demands of the new law.
That's a great response. Thank you. Next, I'll go on to Elizabeth. There's a question for Kaiser Permanente. Do you use certified recyclers to manage your obsolete IT equipment?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have some specific organizations that we work with. As you might guess, we wind up with a lot of obsolete equipment in a variety of different ways. And so we have a variety of different certified organizations we work with to either recycle them or repurpose them or donate them. But that is a big component of our strategy, trying to reduce that electronic waste to make sure products get a full life cycle rather than just getting used partially and then destroyed or whatnot. So yeah, certified recyclers and life cycle is really important part of our strategy.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's one of the very prominent questions we had in our Q&A session. And as we've already started discussing this so openly, we might as well transition naturally into our roundtable. And I have the first question for you, Julia. Your role at the OSD involves integrating sustainable specifications into statewide contracts. Could you share some strategies your organization employs to incorporate climate conscious practices when procuring these electronics?
Sure, yes, absolutely. And, you know, as I said in my presentation, we've integrated EPEAT requirements into a number of our EPEAT IT related contracts, and, you know, mostly the hardware contracts, so that anybody that purchases off of that contract will be purchasing EPEAT or TCO registered devices. And, you know, we signed up for the Climate Plus as an advocate. And some things we're doing as a Climate Plus advocate, we've been working on a project with our Executive Office of Technology Services and Security, or they're called EOTS, to revise some of the requests for quote templates that are used by buyers, and they were developed years ago. And so what we've done is integrated some additional environmental and climate preferable language into them. And we have actually a buyer webinar coming up next week to share the new RFQ templates. And we'll be going over environmental and climate preferable opportunities. And we actually have over 250 people signed up for that webinar. So we're really looking forward to it. And then part of the RFQ project it led us to publish an EPP IT webpage on our OSD webpage for information for buyers. And, you know, it includes information about EPEAT, TCO, Energy Star. It also links to the EPEAT publication on environmental considerations for software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. So really making sure that we're highlighting that there are opportunities to include environmental and climate considerations in the service contracts. And we also included information about take back, recycling, management of e-waste. You guys just talked about that. We require all of the vendors on our contract dealing with e-waste to be either be e-steward certified or meet the R2 standards. And we also require executive agencies to choose remanufactured toner cartridges. As the Commonwealth, we have a policy on using remans, and they've been proven to be very cost effective and the best value for the Commonwealth. So there are some other considerations in there on that website as well, but those are some of the things that we've been working on to really advocate for, especially the Climate Plus products, EP products.
No, that's great. And as we're speaking regarding state procurement, I'd like to turn over to Charlene. How has the California state integrated or tried to effectively integrate climate conscious practices in your procurement of electronics?
Well, we started years ago using a request for a proposal where if there was not competition, we could at least incentivize and give points to those manufacturers that took action to reduce plug loads or increase energy efficiency. And then we moved through the years to where EPEAT came up with their certification, and we utilized that. But we're also moving towards looking at not only the product, but really looking at the manufacturers. What actions do they take to manage their ESGs, or environmental social governance? What actions do they take to reduce not only their GHG emissions, but also increase diversity and increase small business and economic growth? So those are just other parts of the EPEAT Climate that will help align with that, with the ESG.
That's great. And speaking on how your organizations are using their contracts to address ESG objectives, I'd like to turn over a little bit to Elizabeth and see, because your organization spreads across multiple states, or it's not just focused on one state. I think you mentioned you're in just over 7 states. What strategies do you believe your organization is implementing towards addressing some of these climate conscious products?
Yeah, so a couple things. So, and I think it was mentioned with Charlene and Julia, we have a lot of climate questions in the RFPs that go out, so we get information from suppliers. We're doing standardized contracting, so it's not that each of our individual areas is buying whatever they might be buying in their own. We have standard contracts that are out there, which means we're able to have standard requirements and standard levels, and include things like wanting things to be EPEAT certified when we're looking at electronics. So we have kind of standards around that. And we work with our suppliers where we have the opportunity, when we're putting contracts in place, to get them to commit to driving changes in their own product line. So we try and standardize, we try and talk with a common voice in our procurement of what we want throughout our footprint. And then we make sure that when we're buying, that sustainability really is a component that we're evaluating whenever we're looking at buying products. I mentioned before, we do have robust goals within the organization. Every year we have an environmentally preferable purchasing goal that we have to hit, and so that gets everybody involved in the process. And so part of that, one is training procurement staff, but 2, getting people to really have a procurement or a sustainability mindset through the procurement process. And like Charlene mentioned, we're looking at the broader thing too. We're also looking at diversity and economic impact and just all those pieces of sustainability, trying to be able to make the best choices that we can in our purchasing to be as your wording, as climate conscious as we can be, and definitely an ongoing process.
That's great. I think the message I'm getting from all three is that there should be a strong focus on standardization, so it's easier for your vendors and suppliers to understand the requirements that are being put in these RFPs. That sets a baseline for them when they are seeking to engage with your organizations on how to deliver value, especially on what we just termed as our climate conscious objectives. I think that really does set the stage for the next question I was going to pose, and I'm going to take this to Julia. As the administrator of Executive Order 515, which is a policy goal from the government, you're most likely familiar with EPEAT. Could you elaborate on how EPEAT itself aligns with your organizational goals? I know you had mentioned some other eco labels, and they are very, very valuable across different product lines, whether we're talking about electronics, furniture, green buildings, but specifically with relations to electronics and EPEAT. How does this align with Executive Order 515?
Sure. So, we've been, as I said, we've been reporting on reductions in metric tons of carbon equivalent in our annual report for years. And, as I said already, by purchasing EPEAT registered devices, we're able to calculate that with this great calculator. And in fiscal year 22 alone, we, what did we do? An equivalent to close to a reduction in 127,000 metric tons of carbon equivalent over the lifetime of that product. So I think, with the Climate Plus, we'll be identifying those devices that meet the new criteria, and we'll be reporting on those as well in the future. Most of our focus has been on the products themselves, and I think a lot of the speakers here are talking about, really taking a look at the companies, the businesses themselves and their practices. And, as our climate chief's recommendations in her report, we are developing a vendor scorecard to include in our procurements, disclosure of vendor emissions and climate risk. We're really looking at what California is doing. Thank you, Charlene, and also what the federal government is doing, and we're watching that very closely to see what GSA is requiring. So having EPEAT move forward with the Climate Plus criteria, it's a really great starting point for getting vendors to start to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions and set carbon reductions, and climate-based targets, which I think is super important to have those targets in there as well.
I think one key point you mentioned is scorecards. Scorecards, I think, are a very novel way for these vendors and suppliers to know exactly what the state is requiring and make it easier for them to report in these requirements. I think creating things like scorecards and templates for reporting enables the vendors to do a little bit more, to make their work a little bit more easier. And this brings me to the question I would like to ask you, Charlene, because we just mentioned scorecards and templates. What advice do you have for other public institutions and entities seeking to leverage EPEAT or to leverage eco-labels for their own climate and sustainability goals?
One, not all certifications are created equal. We heard that in the beginning of the presentations of this webinar, that they're only specific, they have to meet certain specific criteria, and that's the US EPA Eco Labels and Standards and Guidance criteria. And that's what EPEAT label does. It has a consensus body and it follows that format. So make sure that you choose the right labels that you're referencing. What also can help is if you're doing mandatory centralized contracts, you can put in the requirements, but training is important too. Going out and training your staff to take action. And that's a way to increase. I know the state of California has benchmarked its sustainable purchasing practices against like organization. We're rolling that out to our departments. So it's like you talked about scorecards for suppliers and manufacturers. It's a scorecard for purchasers, and that's how we're going to incentivize and move the needle It's also recognizing the good work that purchasers do. When we don't have a mandatory contract, we provide standards and specifications, specifically standards for them to follow. Or and then they can put that information into their solicitation directly. So having those tools available for buyers to make quick action. They're not all a group of engineers. We are fortunate to have a group of engineers in central procurement for California that can get down and look at the really KPIs of a product, but also looking at the suppliers. So again, it's recognition for the good work they do, looking at not just the products we buy, but what actions we take to educate and reduce impacts, increase EPP purchases, and then be innovative. Look for doing best value procurements where you can, where there's not competition, and making sure that you have the right label that you choose.
That's really great. That's very comprehensive. That's given me personally a lot to think about. And you mentioned a lot about the reporting procedures, the corporate scorecards, the trainings that are going to be involved in educating some of the people within the industry and within the organization about some of these things. If I could turn on to Elizabeth, we are talking a lot about things that relate with data. And given your role in providing contextual business intelligence for impact spending, how do you see an increasing demand for these climate conscious electronics driving innovation within healthcare and procurement practices?
Yeah, so that's a big question, and data is a huge component of this work. Like I said, we have goals around greenhouse gas reduction emissions, and before we can even really make progress on that, we need to know where we are. What emissions are coming from our products, where are hotspots, and finding that information can then drive change from our buyers' activities, so that then they're focused on that and making it. But also that information then can change behavior on our supplier side when they see that we're asking for things as well as others are asking for the same things, and having kind of data available around that to show volume of purchases and how big an impact is of something is really critical to us. And our expectation is, as we require more climate appropriate products and others are asking for the same things, that we're really moving the market and driving change. So that's a big part of our work, and metrics and analytics all are a component about that. And again, it's all part of our bigger goal, tying climate to health, of trying to make improvements. And the last thing I will add is, from a data and analytics spot, I know what we spend, I know what we buy, I know the impact of it. One of our key efforts, though, really is reducing what we buy and use to begin with. Because the best way to reduce climate impacts is to not buy something so somebody didn't have to manufacture it, and then we don't have to ship it somewhere, we don't have to deliver. So we're also trying to add that kind of training thought process, so that we're only buying what we need to buy, and then when we do buy that, we buy something that's most climate friendly as possible, and that we continue to use our purchasing power to kind of drive the marketplace towards innovation and change.
Oh, that's a great summary of that. I think, like you mentioned, data can drive our education, it can drive our training, it can drive even our procurement decisions. And this helps us to make more informed decisions, whether to even buy, if that is appropriate in our sustainable objectives. Before we go, I'd like to open the floor for each of you to give us a little bit of your parting thoughts. I know, Julia, you had mentioned earlier about an upcoming webinar. Excited to hear what that entails. Elizabeth, when I listened to you speak at SPLC, you had some innovations that Kaiser Permanente was working on in terms of the different products that you're changing and how they're working. So I'd like to open the floor for any parting thoughts and anything exciting that you're coming up with.
I would like to just, my parting thought is that we need to make finding these products and purchasing these products much easier. That's a big focus of mine going forward. I love all the work that Michael Bloom is doing with SF Tool. He's really been a pioneer in this area, but I encourage all of you to review how you're purchasing products, whether it's easy to find and purchase them, and for that purchasing entity, making it as easy as possible.
That's great. Thank you.
And I
Elizabeth?
definitely like to lean into that. What we're trying to do is make it so when our buyers purchase things, and it would be true for other organizations, that doing the right thing is the easiest default thing. So whether it's guided buying or making the products that we want purchased to be on the top of the list and the other ones harder to find or whatever, but making doing the right thing easy is going to help drive change. And then making sure our key suppliers are involved in what goals you're aiming for. I think, Emmanuel, you referenced some work that we've done in the past is we work with our major suppliers, with their product development, product innovation teams, so that they know the goals we have and what we're aiming to, and they can include that in their development process. And we've had some real successes that way of getting some environmentally friendly products out of that we wouldn't have if we didn't have that. So make it easy to do the right thing, and then collaborate to kind of drive the change you want, or the two ending thoughts I would have.
Thank you. Charlene?
I will have to go as 3 in a row. It is about making it easier for buyers. It's also about having metrics so that you can look at the landscape of where you can take action next, and being collaborative and working, like with the Buy Clean California Act, we work with industry. It's working with GEC, it's working with manufacturers to bring about change. We are working on a sustainability tool, but I really think part of making it easy is the incorporation of AI. So making it a seamless transition of data, so that we can really use those metrics to analyze the data and create change.
Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. This was truly enlightening. It was truly insightful. I also want to thank you again for being here. And together, let's embark on this enlightening journey together. I'll turn it over to the wonderful Susan Herbert. She's GEC's Vice President of Eco Labels and Manufacturer Resources, to provide some insights on what it means to be an EPEAT Climate Plus manufacturer champion. Thank you again, everyone.
You're muted, Susan. Nope, still can't hear you.
Can everybody hear me right?
Yep.
Okay, everybody can hear me. Great. Sorry about that. Technical problems. Hi, everybody, and so glad you could join us today. And thank you, Emmanuel. As Emmanuel said, my name is Susan Herbert. It was amazing to hear from the panelists just now about how their policies and their procurement is catalyzing the demand for less climate impactful or decarbonized products. And this leads directly into the next session, the supply side of this equation. And I believe that I have the most enviable role in today's webinar to introduce you to the EPEAT Climate Plus champions. These are organizations that are stepping up and moving beyond what's required by the EPEAT Eco Label, which is already demonstrating sustainability leadership for electronics. These are truly inspiring companies, and as part of our webinar today, we'll get to hear directly from some of them just a little bit later. But before we get to that, I want to tell you a bit more about what these organizations are doing and why it's so inspiring. Next slide, please. But first, our EPEAT Climate Plus champions, AOC, ASUS, Dell, ISO, HP, Lenovo, Lexmark, MMD monitors and displays, and Xerox. You can find further information on these Climate Plus champions and the more than 1,200 EPEAT Climate Plus designated products on the EPEAT registry at epeat.net. And as you'll hear from them in a few minutes, these organizations have already committed to mitigating climate change and are taking direct actions in their product design, in their corporate operations, and in their supply chains, the manufacturing and transporting of their products. But they're also taking the crucial step of committing to fulfilling the progressive requirements of EPEAT's climate criteria and be verified as doing so by independent third parties. And this is important. It provides procurement professionals, investors, policymakers, and other stakeholders with a powerful tool, an easy button, as we keep hearing about, to use in their procurements, their investments, and other decisions in light of their own climate change mitigation ambitions. It communicates that these champions stand ready to serve their customers as the demand for emissions tracking and reduction grows even further. Next slide, please. As we heard earlier from Patty, to be a Climate Plus champion, an EPEAT participating brand must have products listed in the EPEAT registry which have achieved the Climate Plus designation. But Climate Plus champions are also taking enterprise-wide actions, which we've heard from our purchasing panel how important knowing organizations are doing this is. These organizations have proven they meet criteria for pushing for and using energy efficient upstream manufacturing processes and using electricity from renewable energy sources such as solar, being transparent and making public disclosures of their corporate greenhouse gas inventories that have been third-party verified, and making and tracking against science-based greenhouse gas reduction targets, including material scope 3 emissions. And this is in addition to meeting the existing EPEAT corporate level criteria for responsible supply chain, circularity, and chemicals of concern. Next slide, please. EPEAT Climate Plus champions are taking action now, before they're required to do so in order to participate in EPEAT. They not only have products that meet progressive criteria, but they themselves, as corporations, are leading the way. They're trailblazing. No other Type 1 eco-label for electronics besides EPEAT has this advanced level of science-based and ambitious criteria for mitigating climate change impacts. We are proud to work with these organizations that are making these commitments. We know that other EPEAT participating brands are working on achieving the Climate Plus designation, and we expect our list of Climate Plus champions to grow over the coming weeks and months. We encourage all of you to check back with the EPEAT registry to monitor this progress and see the number of Climate Plus designated products grow. And for those brands out there that are not yet champions but are interested in becoming one, or that have questions, excuse me, please contact us. So next slide. I think we do have a bit of time to take a few questions on Climate Plus champions or on Climate Plus itself. We encourage you to type your questions into the chat. And if I don't know if we have any questions, but if we don't, I am very honored to present the videos from our EPEAT Climate Plus champions. And with that, I suggest we please roll tape.
Susan, we actually have a quick question. I'll help moderate it. Susan mentioned that EPEAT is an easy button for companies that are committed, but how are they approaching equity in the future of their criteria development? Small companies, sorry, excuse me, it's a big question. Small companies are getting closed out of the process because it's so costly to get all the verifications. Little companies want to be sustainable, and we cannot be viable to complete because they are stumped out of competitions with larger companies. How are you trying to help the small companies with these EPEAT equity issues?
That's a great question, and I think my colleague Patty Dillon may also be able to have some response to that. But we actually take a great deal of pride in the fact that on a number of participating brand basis, by far the majority of brands participating in EPEAT are micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. It's very important to us that these smaller organizations be able to participate and keep being able to get value out of a market-based instrument such as an eco-label. We work diligently and very hard to make sure that all of the materials, the guidance materials and the webinars and the support that we provide the participating brands are very clear. They're as helpful as possible to these smaller organizations. We also have conformity assurance bodies that do this, the independent third-party verification that work very closely with the smaller organizations. So this is an imperative for us to ensure that these micro, small, medium-sized enterprises continue to be able to partake in eco-labels. It's a great question. Thank you.
We got another question from Cynthia. EP criteria already reduce carbon in products. How much more carbon would Climate Plus address? 10%, 50%, or more?
I think Patty is our resident expert on our criteria. Patty, are you still there?
I am still here. That's a really, really great question. So first of all, we have to recognize that these Climate Plus criteria are being applied across all of our product categories. And so some of these product categories have not had any criteria around these issues before. So we have not completed our new environmental benefits calculator to actually, document this, the benefit. But we do know that these are new requirements, and we do know that we can achieve, significant reduction in the supply chain carbon by using renewable electricity. If you look at our state of sustainability research, we've documented, for example, based on World Economic Forum data that shows, what is the potential for the use of renewable electricity. It's upwards, it's like 30% or so reduction if we were to employ renewable electricity. We know that manufacturer energy efficiency can reduce supply chain emissions by another 20%. But we also have to recognize this is a journey. And when I say it's a journey, it means that right now, are we going to realize all those savings? No, we need to be working progressively up through the supply chain, and we're working on that. And one of the first key issues is for companies to begin to build their awareness about what are their carbon emissions. So it's doing greenhouse gas inventories, doing product carbon footprint, so they can actually see where the impacts are, because we do know that knowledge also helps drive progress. So it's a journey. We don't have that exact percentage right this minute, but we're working on it.
I knew she had the information to answer that question. And with that, I think we are going to present these videos. Again, I am so honored to be able to introduce these. May please roll tape.
Hello, my name is Kevin Young, Technical Product and Regulatory Compliance Lead at AOC and Philips MMD. We want to thank the Global Electronics Council for launching the new EPEAT Climate Plus designated products, which further empowers manufacturers like us to introduce more sustainable products onto the market, as well as reducing climate impact via EPEAT's eco-label for electronics. At AOC and Philips MMD, we believe that sustainability is the key to our success, and offers us the opportunity to use our skills, expertise, and relationships to create a better future for individuals, society at large, and the environment we all live in. Together with the Global Electronics Council and its EPEAT Climate Plus program, we will bring sustainability, circular economy, and climate change mitigation to the next level for our customers. Thank you very much.
At ASUS, our goal is to create a net zero enterprise that helps drive the shift towards a circular economy with a responsible supply chain, creating shared value for every one of us. We are very proud to receive EPEAT Climate Plus Champion status and showcase how we are mitigating our climate impact. For example, we offer low carbon products with verified carbon footprint reports. We also use renewable energy at the levels over the 12.5% EP threshold. Our near-term emission reduction targets have been validated by SBTi, and we have guided our key suppliers to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 24% in 2022. For ASUS, sustainability is a continuous journey. We constantly raise the bar for ourselves, translate our goals into practical actions and tangible outcomes, and keep pushing towards a more sustainable future. Let's sustain that incredible future together.
Change is inevitable. Whether it's for the better depends on what we all do next. That's why we're working to turn the greatest challenge of our time into the greatest opportunity to drive human progress. With the right actions, technology, measurement, partnerships, and people, we will achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. To do this, we're reducing our energy needs while accelerating and advocating for the use of renewable electricity. We're working with our suppliers to help them manage their emissions, and we're continuing to design, build, and test innovative products and business models to reduce emissions. And we'll do it together, harnessing the power of technology to help people, businesses, and society achieve their own climate goals, so that we can face the changes that are to come and embrace new solutions that will transform the future of our planet. Join us.
HP is proud to be an EPEAT Climate Plus champion. This achievement represents HP's commitment to reinventing our products and services so that our customers, our partners, and communities can shape a sustainable future. We are on a mission to create the world's most exciting devices that are also the world's most sustainable devices. We are creating a world where customers don't have to choose between experiences they seek and the values they hold dear.
Hi, I'm Wayne, Lenovo's Global Eco-Labels Manager, and Lenovo is proud to have been named an EPEAT Climate Plus champion, with more than 400 products registered on day one of Climate Plus eligibility. These products, which include desktops, servers, monitors, workstations, notebooks, and more, have been independently verified against a rigorous set of climate-focused criteria, including greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, renewable energy sourcing, product energy efficiency standards, product carbon footprinting, and more. As our Executive Director of Global ESG and Regulatory Compliance, Mary Jacques, stated, innovation in our product and services design process is key to a more sustainable future. We are proud to be recognized as an EPEAT Climate Plus champion and will continue to think big, collaborate, and push the boundaries of what we think is possible in our products and services. I would also like to congratulate the other Climate Plus manufacturers on this important goal. As manufacturers, we push for and design more sustainable products, not only because our customers demand it, but because we believe it is the right thing to do, and we live on this planet as well. Thank you.
Lexmark is excited to announce that we are EPEAT Climate Plus champions with over 40 certified devices to choose from. We welcome new buyers to join our existing longer-term customers in choosing Lexmark as your solution provider. Hi, I'm David DeVore, Lexmark's Senior Global Sustainability Engineer. For those of you not familiar with Lexmark, we're an international technology company located right here in Lexington, Kentucky, with over 7 million devices placed in over 170 countries. We maintain a full portfolio of EPEAT certified imaging devices. We help customers like you make a lasting impression on your world. Our circular economy model allows customers to experience lower environmental impacts through our world-class supplies take-back program, our world-class use of post-consumer recycled plastic content, developing long-life durable products, just to name a few. Our commitment to sustainability is to be carbon neutral by 2035. The Climate Plus requirements extend beyond the products themselves to how we manage our own operations and reduce greenhouse gas emission. Customers across the globe can be confident that by choosing Lexmark, you are making a positive choice for the environment. Today, Lexmark stands with other GEC participating manufacturers to celebrate this substantial milestone in helping you each reduce your impact and provide long-lasting, sustainable products for your business.
Hello, I am Lorenta Garansky, Xerox Holding Company Product Sustainability Program Manager. In 2021, Xerox announced plans to fast-track our net zero commitment by 10 years, targeting 2040. Today, we are focused on improving operational efficiency with key stakeholders across our value chain. We are pioneers in the circular economy and take a life cycle approach to low-carbon design, addressing the impact of both our suppliers and our customers. At Xerox, we recognize that reaching this goal will take dedication and commitment. Meeting the new EPEAT Climate Plus criteria is one example of our dedication and commitment to achieving our 2040 goals. The Climate Plus criteria address critical topics that are key to our corporate net zero roadmap, such as public and third-party verifiable product greenhouse gas disclosures, science-based greenhouse gas reduction targets, energy-efficient manufacturing, sourcing electricity from renewable energy sources, and product energy efficiency. Xerox is proud to be an EPEAT Climate Plus champion and will continue to do our part in making practical and impactful contributions to address climate change.
Well, that's the end of our agenda. We want to thank our panelists, our speakers, and you, our audience, for the engaging discussion today on decarbonizing technology. I personally can feel the urgency in our community when I talk to folks every day, but also seeing everyone here today and participating. And it is a privilege for the Global Electronics Council to host this public dialogue and continue our push towards practical incentives and solutions to the climate crisis. We view these efforts not as the beginning, but as a market catalyst for sustainable products and services. And we look forward to continuing on this now much faster journey with you. Next slide, please. So if you are in fact in the DC area, we are holding a reception tonight, an EPEAT Climate Plus reception at the Hotel Monaco from 5 to 7 p.m. We look forward to, for those that are already registered, to see you there. If you are in DC and haven't registered, just reach out to myself or Mei Chang, who's been our moderator today, and just let us know. We would love to see you there to help celebrate the launch of EPEAT Climate Plus and the success of today's public forum. So we wish you a good rest of your day and look forward to future opportunities to continue this dialogue and continue to work together towards addressing climate change mitigation together. Thank you very much.